Okay, so moving along here, we're in the second half of the Earth chapter, or the part of this larger chapter on cosmic evolution that's labeled Earth, down to the part that says Atlantis. The commentator in the Outline of Esoteric Science labels this section starting from paragraph 69 and going all the way down to 89, which is where the Earth section proper ends, and then it shifts to Steiner's account of Atlantis. Goes from 69 to 89, and the commentator in here labels this section Lemuria, but the word Lemuria is never mentioned by Steiner in the text during these paragraphs. But he calls it the Lemurian section, this commentator does. So we're finishing off the second half of Earth with this Lemurian section that extends from paragraph 69 to 89. We've already talked about paragraph 69, so we'll start with where we're at with paragraph 70. Now, during this section, Steiner gives his creation myth, explaining all types of things that come into being, such as various different bodily organs, such as respiration, circulation of the blood, how heredity works. Then eventually he gets into this account of how free will comes into being and karma, which will later form a major opposition in his theology, as it were. So heredity comes in, he says, because beings preserve, the higher beings preserve ether bodies, and they pass them along through the generations, so that ancestors feel themselves to be part of group souls. That gives them a sense of heredity because the ether body is preserved, according to what he will later call the principle of spiritual economy, is preserved and then passed along down the generations. So that's heredity. Then the spirits of form had given, I think this was in paragraph 69, the spirits of form had given human beings the I spark, and through a feeling of internal warmth that then suffuses them after the three components of the soul have separated out, the sentient soul and the mind soul, and then the consciousness soul especially. Then the spirits of form give them the spark of the I. So they start to feel a bit independent here, and this internal warmth that they feel coursing through them actually then lays the basis for the circulation of the blood. Circulation of blood comes from this internal warmth and this I feeling. Respiration comes into being through air that is streaming at the human beings from higher beings, simply feeding them air, and it's coursing through them. And then that's respiration, and then a part of this air then that they feel within them then separates off to become an organ unto itself, which lays the basis for the nervous system that the astral body will interact with. The astral body in particular has to do with the nervous system. And then Steiner says that what we see emerging are three different types of humans here. And I don't know for sure whether this will, I think this later lays the basis of his race theory, that different races will come out of this. The first race that he's talking about is the race that comes in with when the earth is at its fire stage, and the spirits of form are working on it in this fire stage. And these spirits are the ones who remain behind and develop through these processes. Once water comes in and densifies and chases out the sun, then solids come in and densify and it chases out the moon. But these beings are the most highly developed and have the best developed heads and are the most harmonious beings. The second group of beings that comes in when the fire densifies into air, and they are working with the spirits of fire, actually. Don't get confused by that. They're working with the spirits of fire through the air, and these human beings are beginning to lose their sense of memory of ever having had a body-free existence on the other side. But they're sort of in between this last group of humans, which comes in when the air densifies into water, and they are working with the sons of life, the angels, who are at the lowest hierarchy, but who work through the water. But they become the most entangled in earthly developments, and therefore their limbs are the best developed. So we have an opposition of the ones who have the most highly developed ability to think, and those at the other end who have the strongest limbs. It sounds a little to me like laying the basis for what would later be the Neanderthals versus the Cro-Magnons. The Neanderthals, as is well known, were physically much better built men than Cro-Magnons because they had to be. They were living for hundreds of thousands of years and surviving through difficult ice ages, learning how to hunt and survive in those ice ages. In and through them, their physical bodies were very heavily developed, whereas Cro-Magnons had it much easier. They came in during an interglacial out of Africa, up through Palestine, and then across into Europe. Their anatomies were much skinnier and more gracile, but they had conceptual thinking of a sort that the Neanderthals did not have. So it sounds a little bit like that. And knowledge of Neanderthals was known about during Steiner's time, but it's curious that he never mentions these things. Dinosaurs were known about as well, but he doesn't mention them in his creation myth. Lots of things that were known about on the physical plane. He just skips right through. He's telling a different story, an astral version of the creation of the earth, not the physical. And so he also mentions that even before the sun withdrew from the earth because of the densification of water during this phase, other planets had withdrawn. Jupiter had withdrawn, Mars had withdrawn, Saturn had withdrawn, because each one of them contains a group of spiritually immature humans that just have not been able to deal with the densification of the earth with solids and incarnating back into bodies that are becoming more and more dense. They're just not ready for that, so they withdraw to those planets. And he says that animals now are beings left over from the previous moon phase who made it up to receiving the astral element of the moon, but are not mature enough to receive the human element, the I, and its three separate souls, sentient mind and consciousness soul. They are atavistic beings. So those then become animals. Plants are also beings from old moon who have remained stuck in the old moon cycle, but their etheric bodies somehow become united with the Earth's etheric body. The Earth's it has its own etheric body that animates it, and that of animals becomes identified with it and becomes a kind of giant group collective soul, the plant soul, that connects all plants together through this massive etheric body that plants share with other plants. And of course, the mineral kingdom is simply what is left behind after the moon is extruded or pulls from the earth to take the calcifying, densifying processes with it, so that human beings who are returning from their day side have physical bodies that are still pliable enough to work with once they get back inside of them. That lays the basis for the mineral kingdom. It's just what's left behind. It's left over also from the Saturn period, which was purely physical matter. But it's densified into solids now. So we're dealing with solids. Then we start to get into Steiner's account of the origins of free will and versus karma. This is a very important passage here. Also the evolution of things like illness, death, and error. All these sort of negative things he attributes to what he calls the Luciferic beings who have withdrawn with the moon. So they've gone with the moon, but nonetheless, they are able to work on the humans' astral bodies and their I principles to unite them so closely that the I it acts in and through the astral body and uses the astral as its sort of envelope for actions. And in doing so, they start to feel much more independent now from the higher beings of the spirit world, especially the sun beings. And they begin to develop a sense now of independence due to the Luciferic spirits tampering with their I and their astral bodies. So free will now comes in as a result of this, but also error and evil and sin, because the astral body, thinking with and through it, leads to misperceptions that can cause errors in thinking. So they make all kinds of mistakes, and this is Steiner's account for the origins of evil and error. These are byproducts of free will that these beings now have. They're capable of making their own free choices. Prior to the Luciferic beings tampering with them, what would have happened had evolution continued with them working with the higher beings from the sun is that the future was known and predetermined. There was no free will. Now, once the Lucifer experience have introduced free will as a result of tampering with their astral bodies and their eyes, now there's free will, and the future is totally uncertain. And because of the uncertainty of the future, fear now is invented. Fear enters in as a byproduct of this. Then death also enters in because death appears due to their assimilating earthly impressions into the astral bodies, that part of it which unites with the forces that destroys physical bodies. So now they have to deal with the problem of the physical body is gone, so you have to go to the other side and build a new physical body for a new lifetime. So the death, rebirth cycle gets extricated now from the sleeping and waking cycle, due once again to the influence of these Luciferic beings. Now there are two different types of humans now on the earth, in addition to the three different types that we have seen of the ones who have remained on the earth and gone through this whole cycle, those who have stayed behind, who have worked with the sleep and wake cycle and come back into densifying bodies and figured out how to use them and work with them. Those are the regular humans. But there are these other humans who left with the other planets, with the outer planets of Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. They left because they were in a state of arrested development, arrested spiritual development, and they could not work with these denser bodies. So they left, and then the sun left, that happened, and then the moon left, that happened with the Lucifer beings on the moon, interfering with human beings. So these other beings are coming back, but meanwhile, the human beings who have been left behind on Earth have been reincarnating. They've been going from lifetime to lifetime, so they've already set up a pattern of reincarnation that now just brings karma into being as a byproduct of that incarnation. And Steiner says that the only reason this happened was because a certain amount of the etheric body was left out of the physical body so that the higher beings could work on it. Because if the higher beings could not work on that surplus ether body, then the humans would simply have reincarnated without going to the other side and working with higher beings in between death and a new birth. They would simply have hopped from body to body, and they wouldn't have the great interim period that is absolutely necessary, the life review and the building of a new astral body and learning on the other side. All these things that take place in between lifetimes would not have happened had a certain amount of the ether body not been left over for the higher beings to work on, because the ether body was shrinking and becoming more and more identical with the physical body. And as it does that, human beings slowly lose their capacity for vast ability to remember things. Memory is lost, but at the same time, conceptual thinking will start replacing it and will start coming in as a result of the ether body shrinking and becoming more identical with the physical body. So meanwhile, these humans have been reincarnating. They have created karma. Free will also has been created as a result of the Luciferic beings tampering with their astral bodies and their eyes. But during sleep, they go to the other side. The astral body and the eye goes to the other side during sleep, where it's worked upon. And it's worked upon by the higher, by the lower hierarchy of the spirits of form, the spirits of personality, the spirits of fire, and the sons of life, or the angels, who work on the astral body and the eye when it's on the other side and conferring with the higher beings. Whereas meanwhile, the higher spiritual beings of spirits of will, spirits of wisdom, and spirits of motion then work on the physical and etheric bodies this is during sleep. Then work on the physical etheric bodies to repair damage that has been done to them by the mistakes made by the astral body during the daytime, making bad decisions or error, evil, and sin. Those types of things, misperceptions that the astral body then has inflicted on the physical and etheric bodies that lead to things like illness, is worked on by this hierarchy, spirits of will, wisdom, and motion. Just as the astral body and the ego is worked on during sleep by the lower hierarchy, the spirits of form, and then the lower three below that of, personality, fire, and twilight. They work on that. So we get this distinction between the daytime and the nighttime. Because the day and night cycle now comes in the cases of all the planets, they all begin to rotate as the result of the spiritual beings which are in them then cause these processes of rotation. so that we get this sleep-wake cycle now, which is very important for the human beings to have some sort of contact with the higher beings, because they're becoming so independent under the influence of the Luciferic beings from the moon that there's danger that they'll lose contact with the spiritual world altogether, which is gradually exactly what Steiner's model says happens here. The humans slowly lose contact with that world. So we have this problem of new souls then. So these guys who have stayed behind, who are tough enough to go through the process of dealing with the sleep-waking cycle and returning to hardening bodies and learning how to use them, who have also invented reincarnation and karma, going through this process, have remained behind. They're old souls, basically. But we have these new souls coming in from the outer planets who are first-timers, who start incarnating, and they are less protected. Their etheric bodies, because they haven't gone through this process, are less protected. Their etheric bodies now, not their astral and their eye that's being tampered with on the earth by the Luciferic beings. But their etheric bodies are less protected from tampering by the Luciferic beings. And so when they come in, they're easier for the Luciferic beings to tamper with and manipulate. And they end up becoming lower beings, lower humans, who take that spark of free will and run with it. And they go crazy with it to the point where now they cause a huge conflagration that ends Lemuria. It puts an end to it as a result of these beings who are new souls coming in, who are prey, whose etheric bodies are prey to influence by Luciferic spirits. And also, Steiner says, our Ramanic spirits are coming into being here too. Those are the spirits that have to do with the material world, with the densification of matter, tempting the human being eventually to believe that only machines matter, that only materialism matters. They're at the opposite extreme from the Luciferic spirits, who want to tempt the human being into believing that only the spirit world matters. So we have these two worlds and this opposition between these two types of humans. Later, in the Atlantis chapter, he will talk about the emergence of the inner planets, where he'll say that Mercury and Venus actually split off after the sun left the earth due to the densification into water, and it left the earth, and the Christ being was on it as the leader of that extrusion of the sun from the earth. They only wanted to deal with warmth and air, not water and earth. But these beings then left from the sun to become Mercury and Venus. And then he says another being left the sun named Vulcan. And Vulcan left the sun to join these two, but he doesn't say that it becomes a planet. But I noticed that one YouTube commentator pointed out on one of these videos that there was an esoteric tradition, which I did not know, that there was a planet called Vulcan in between Mercury and the sun. So Steiner obviously must have known that, or he wouldn't have grouped Vulcan together. He doesn't say that he's part of a planet, just a higher being who also left the sun, and groups him in together with Mercury and Venus, and says that during the Atlantis period, these will become the founders of the higher mind, conceptual thinking, the arts and the sciences, and the oracles in Atlantis who preserve the knowledge of these higher beings from these planets are the ones who bring higher civilization in, whereas the lower beings from Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, the outer planets, are they're lower beings, and they're associated with what Steiner says is called symbolic thinking, whereas the higher beings of Mercury, Venus, and Vulcan are going to be associated with conceptual thinking. So we'll see what happens next time then with the story of Atlantis, and find out how that plays itself out here. That'll be next.